Pop quiz, LSV. Do you remember fusion summoning and how it works?
Yeah, I remember that.
Give us the breakdown. Give us the breakdown.
That's where you have, in order to summon something out of your fusion deck, you have to like play a card that has like some component requirements, and then you're able to summon that monster.
Ding, ding, ding.
Basically out of your fusion deck. Is that close
correct.
enough?
Close enough, close enough. The reason I say that is because now we're going to be moving forward in time in Yu-Gi-Oh's history. So the fusion deck was not the fusion deck for very long. Now it's known as the extra deck, and that's because we have new types of summoning mechanics that resonate in the extra deck, or reside in the extra deck, excuse me. And we're going to be showing off the next one in that evolution, which is synchro summoning. Now, all of these mechanics, and this includes synchro summoning, basically require you to take 2 or more monsters and do something to get Guy out of the extra deck, just like fusion summoning. So that's why I wanted to remind you what that is. Gotcha. So we're going to be showing you some cards, and just like normal, you're going to try to guess whether or not these cards were banned at any point, just to keep it nice and simple. But before we get into that, just like how with fusion summoning, polymerization was the mechanism to summon these cards, or any sort of fusion spell card, if you will, I need to show you the mechanism in which to summon the synchro monsters. So we're going to start very simple by showing you a tuner monster. Give this card a read.
Dark Resonator is 1300, 300 Fiend Tuner / effect. The first time this card would be destroyed by a battle each turn, it is not destroyed. Okay.
So what's notable here is that in the typing, it says Fiend Tuner Effect. So any monster that is a tuner, it would say in the text here that it is a tuner. If it is not a tuner, then it is considered a non-tuner monster. And you will understand why that's important here in a moment. So I'm going to show you another card. You might remember this guy from a previous video. So just go ahead and give him a read real quick.
Cyber Dragon. It's a 2100, 1600 machine / effect. If only your opponent controls a monster, you can special summon this card from your hand. I actually don't think you showed me this one.
Oh, did I not? Okay, well, I've done a few of these, but in any case, just a very solid card, card. And for the purposes of explaining the synchro summoning mechanic, I wanted to just show you these two cards together because we are going to show you your first synchro monster. These cards are defined by their white colored card border, and this is one of the most iconic ones. Give this one a read.
Stardust Dragon, it's an 8-star, 2500, 2000, Dragon Synchro Effect, 1 tuner plus 1 non-tuner monster. Okay, those are presumably like the components needed. Correct. And it says, when a card or effect is activated that would destroy a card or cards on the field, quick effect, you contribute this card, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy it. During the end phase, if this effect was activated this turn and was not negated, you can special summon this card from your graveyard. Oh, so just like counters something every turn, basically.
Pretty cool, right? Pretty cool. So how synchro summoning works, remember how with fusion summoning, how you would activate whatever fusion card, and then you would take the components from either the hand or field, or if it was a different type of card from whatever zone they say, send them to the graveyard, and then you'd go into your extra deck to play that fusion monster. Synchro summoning works very similarly, but there is a big difference. So you have to have the monsters on the field. You have to have, in this case, let's say your Cyber Dragon, which is a non-tuner, and your Dark Resonator, which is a tuner monster. You add the stars, or the level, so in this case, Cyber Dragon is a 5, and Dark Resonator is a 3, and then because 5 plus 3 equals 8, you're able to synchro summon into Stardust Dragon because the levels add up to the level requirement here. Does that make sense?
But you don't need a specific card to do that. Like, you don't need a spell to do that, right?
Correct, correct. The fusion card, if you will, is kind of baked into the monster being a tuner, if you will. So they tried to simplify the process of like fusion summoning by doing it in a different way, if you will.
Oh yeah, this actually I think is cleaner design, so that your tuner is both the card that lets you summon the monster while also being the component.
Correct.
Like, as opposed to a third card, which is a spell that requires those components. Yeah, no, I think this is pretty clean.
Yeah, so a lot of people love synchro summoning for that reason. Like you said, it's just, once you understand just the very simple aspect that we just discussed, it's pretty straightforward for what it's worth. So what do you think about Stardust Dragon as a whole?
I mean, it looks quite strong. Especially since I suspect Cyber Dragon actually specifically was involved in a lot of this, given that it's got 5 stars and you can special summon it. The ability, once it's in play, like, I mean, it can counter stuff that's going to destroy this, right? Like,
anything.
Yeah, so, I mean, this looks like a very good card. I guess you do have to put these resonators in your deck, which aren't like the best by itself. This card doesn't really. I guess the Dark Resonator just not dying the first time it dies each turn is not. That's kind of nice. It means you can run it out and keep it alive and then use it later if you don't have like the second piece.
I'll help you out a bit too. I picked these two specific monsters to synchro into Stardust Dragon just to keep it simple so you can just get the basics of how to synchro summon. I will say for the purposes of everything I'm going to be showing you in this video, assume that there is enough efficient ways that you can summon these monsters to the field that is not a drawback.
Yeah. My guess is that Stardust Dragon was quite strong, and I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if this was banned, but it looks like a pretty cool card.
Okay.
So I'm gonna guess it. No, I mean, I don't know. I guess I would guess it was banned just because it does seem very strong, but it wouldn't shock me either way. This, like, I've had to recalibrate a little because
what makes you think that?
Because when it comes to like Magic, some of these cards would just be really completely out of control. Like they wouldn't do something like that or would ban it. But the power level for Yu-Gi-Oh is really high. So I would believe this either way. So which is to say I don't have a high confidence level, but I suppose I would lean slightly towards, maybe Stardust Dragon did get banned because a turn 1 Stardust Dragon is very hard to remove, it looks like, which seems like it would be pretty obnoxious.
Well, you are correct in that a turn 1 Stardust Dragon is very obnoxious, especially when this was first printed. These cards were printed about, let's say, 6 to 7 years into Yu-Gi-Oh's lifespan when they introduced this new mechanic. But unfortunately, you're starting off incorrect. Stardust Dragon was never banned. I will say it probably didn't help that it was the ace monster of the protagonist for the anime during this time. They probably wanted to keep that around just, from a sales perspective, I would imagine. But it's as incredibly powerful as Stardust is. Even by modern standards, there have been times where like Stardust Dragon has like popped up here and there because there are situations where it's been good for people who are actually paying attention. I'm talking about more like, Pepe format and, older, like a few years back, not like within the past year or anything. But Stardust Dragon, just a very clean card. I mean, you have to think to have the commitment of resources to funnel into something, there's got to be a really big payoff. So the fact that, especially during this time too, there's a lot of destructive removal, Stardust being able to negate any of those types of cards, whether it's a monster, a spell, or a trap, and then it just keeps coming back and being 2,500 is a very strong statted monster for what it's worth. The really only efficient ways you could kill it were either in battle, so you had to find a way to get something bigger than Stardust Dragon, or you had to find a non-destructive sort of removal, so bouncing something back to the hand, which actually would bounce these cards back to the extra deck, for instance. So just a very solid card. Everyone loves Stardust Dragon. It's a classic. It's iconic. And I figured it'd be a good place to start just to get your bearings in the synchro summoning mechanic. All
right. Good data point for sure.
Speaking of cards that could potentially take care of a Stardust Dragon, let's show you your next synchro monster.
Goyo Guardian, so it's 6 stars, and the stars matter a lot on these because that's actually their actual cost, it seems like.
Correct.
And then it's a warrior synchro effect. And do they all require 1 tuner plus 1 or more non-tuner monsters, or does that vary sometimes?
For the purposes of this video, I think almost everything I'm going to show you is going to require just 1 tuner or 1 or more non-tuners. But as Yu-Gi-Oh! Has aged and progressed, there are some with more specific requirements. So it might say 1 dragon tuner, for instance, or a warrior tuner or something like that. So they might be even more specific with what types of materials you need.
Gotcha. And this, when this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, you can special summon that monster in defense position face up. This card, this card looks pretty strong. It looks comparable to Stardust Dragon, so my guess is that this was not banned. But
I'll give you a hint. Both of these were actually released in the same set. This was the set that introduced synchro summoning altogether.
Okay, well that even makes me even more confident that this wouldn't get banned. Though it does seem very powerful. I mean, you play this, it has some costs to play, of course, and then it's pretty big, 2,800. So I guess the most obnoxious thing about this, I guess, is if you go first and you play this on turn 1, your opponent just can't play a smaller monster. Like, it would just be a disaster for them if they did. So that part is kind of oppressive, but I'm going to go 0 for 2 here because I missed the first one. I'm going to now miss the second because I'm going to guess this wasn't banned, but I'm ready to be wrong again.
And you are correct. You are going to be 0 for 2 because Goyo Guardian was in fact banned. This is people look at Goyo Guardian and they think this is one of the most pushed. When they introduce a new summoning mechanic, they want to get people to play with these new cards, right? So arguably, especially from a business perspective, you could imagine these cards are quite pushed for their power level. And I think you actually hit it right on the nose at the beginning. Goyo Guardian being a 6-star with 2,800 attack power is absurd. Like, even by modern Yu-Gi-Oh standards, I don't think they've printed many cards that have like that stat line for that investment. So this card was very much ahead of its time. And it's funny, though, because I mentioned the interaction with, like, Goyo Guardian being able to take care of Stardust Dragon. That was actually very relevant. And then it was even more frustrating because then
they had not only
they had your Stardust Dragon, and they could protect the Goyo Guardian from destruction effects because they're able to sacrifice Stardust Dragon to protect if they have any sort of, like, comeback potential. So that's one of the strongest interactions that Goyo Guardian has. Again, being a 6-star, I can't understate how important that is, especially in earlier Yu-Gi-Oh! Making an 8-star, like Stardust Dragon, is a little bit more difficult because the levels have to align a bit better. But Goyo Guardian being 6, remember the monster that you can typically normal summon is 4 stars or less. So it's a lot easier to get 2 monsters with lower star lines on the field than it is to get the materials required for like a Stardust Dragon, for instance. But Goyo Guardian was banned, very powerful. Actually received an errata much later on. And it's funny you mentioned where you asked earlier about do they have specific typings for the requirements for these cards. Goyo Guardian now requires an Earth Tuner, I think, and an Earth non-tuner or something like that. So it's unplayable and it's bad and it hasn't seen any plays ever since it came back.
It does seem really like one of the downsides to kind of like direct attacking game is that something like this, if you just play it on turn 1, is like pretty oppressive, right? Like they just can't play something into it. All right. Starting off
very
strong.
Powerful. Yeah, we're starting off strong with this one. See, we're finally getting you. We're finally getting you. All right, let's go back to dragons. Everyone likes dragons. Let's show you this card.
Black Rose Dragon. So this is 7 stars. It's a 2,400, 1,800 dragon synchro effect. And it requires a tuner and a non-tuner. When this card is synchro summoned, you can destroy all cards on the field. Once per turn, you can banish one plant monster from your graveyard, then target one defense position monster your opponent controls. Change that target to face-up attack position, and if you do, its attack becomes 0 until the end of this turn. So it has 2 different abilities, right? Which is when you summon it, it destroys everything on the field. Mm-hmm. And then you can also use it to basically turn one of their defense position monsters into a 0-power attacker. What does attack become 0 until end of turn, I guess? Like, their thing is now in face-up attack position, and then I guess you just attack it. Is that the idea?
That's the idea, right? Because we don't have summoning sickness. So
right,
you can
so
turn...
now their thing is a 0 attack, and you can just go hunt it down. I'm ready to be wrong again, but I do think this got banned. I think because the combination of getting to destroy everything, and then you get to use plant monsters, which presumably you have used to maybe summon this, or there's easy ways to get those in your graveyard, and then you can start hunting their things down. So it kind of seems like it does a little bit of what Goyo Guardian does, while also just being a board sweeper.
Well, do keep in mind, it does destroy all cards. So if you're using that first effect, which is optional because it says you can destroy, it's destroying itself in the process.
Oh, it destroys itself.
Right. So you're only getting one or the other in that instance.
Okay,
I just want to clear. It seemed like you missed that, so I want to have you help you out here.
That's quite a bit less bad. Okay, I'm going to say this did not get banned then. I thought this was a combination of a board wipe that leaves this in play to then hunt down the next thing they play.
Oh, that would be insane.
That sounded like way too much to me. Okay, I'm going to guess this didn't get banned.
And you are correct. I'm not even going to hype that one up. But yes, Black Rose Dragon actually was limited, if you can believe that, for a period of time. Just because having access to a board wipe essentially at any time, because remember, the extra deck is essentially a toolbox for anyone playing Yu-Gi-Oh! At this point, to have all these different really niche sort of effects. So like if you're already playing all these tuners and non-tuners, right? You can access Stardust Dragon to protect your board. You can access Goyo if you want to be really aggressive and take your opponent's stuff. You can access Black Rose if you need to reset the field. And typically people are playing Black Rose Dragon even outside of plant decks just because it's access to a board wipe at any time. And
it
if
doesn't
you
sound
are
like limiting it would do that much then. Just having one is still pretty good, right?
There were ways that during this period that multiple Black Rose could just constantly keep hitting the field if it was at more than one copy. It was, we call them one-card Black Rose combos, where you would summon a tuner that special summons a non-tuner out of the graveyard, and then you could just immediately Black Rose your opponent. So doing that multiple times over was kind of impressive. Yeah, so they limited it to 1. It's at 3 now. Like I said, can see play. It's not out of the realm of possibility because at the end of the day, it is a giant board wipe, but not very popular by modern standards. But old Yu-Gi-Oh standards, this card is a powerhouse and a card that people really love. It's just a really pretty card too.
All right, I have a question that's actually kind of far afield from this.
Okay, sure.
What is the most popular format in Yu-Gi-Oh? Is it with mostly newer cards, or is it like with the entire like pantheon of cards? Like, what do most people play?
So Yu-Gi-Oh is an eternal format. We call it advanced format, but it's really the only format that is competitively supported, and that is just every card since the beginning of the game. And that's it. We have a ban list and a limited list, but we can play cards all the way back from 2002. There has recently been support for a retro format called Edison format, which plays everything up to 2010. I think you'd really like Edison format for that reason. And Black Rose is a part of Edison format, and it's a house in that format. But people really like that because it's sort of harkening back to older Yu-Gi-Oh, where there was everything just didn't happen the first couple turns. There was a lot of like back and forth and strategic play that people really enjoy. Maybe we'll show you that one day. Maybe we'll show you that.
Yeah, no, I was just curious because a lot of the cards we look at are pretty old, which makes sense because like that's where a lot of the funny stuff is. Yeah, but I was wondering how much people interacted with those cards, and it sounds like a lot because the main format does include every card. So
yes, and that's what's cool, right? Because some of these cards, even though they're old, they still see play to this very day, which is awesome.
I wish Magic's most popular format was, like vintage or legacy or whatever. Though, I mean, I guess technically Magic's most popular format is Commander, which does use cards from all entire Magic's history, but Commander is not so much my cup of tea.
Let's show you your next card here. Let's keep going.
All right, Dark Strike Fighter is 7 stars. It's a machine synchro effect, 2600, 1800. Requires, again, 1 tuner, 1 non-tuner. You contribute 1 monster to inflict damage to your opponent equal to its level times 200. Okay, first of all, this is asking your players to do some actually like reasonable math. Like I know it's not that complicated, but most people in their head are not going to be like, oh, 8 times 200, like I can snap that off, right? Like, you know, I guess Yu-Gi-Oh players or card game players would probably do that pretty easily. But as a designer, you stay away from making your players do math on the fly. That is
I have not shown you enough Yu-Gi-Oh cards. We are the complete opposite when it comes to that.
I just can't think of
plenty of math.
There's not that many Magic cards that require you to do multiplication times 200 or really any number. So that I find funny to begin with. But so alarm bells go off because anything that lets you just throw monsters at their face, I think is typically pretty dangerous. That's what I've learned, at least. Mm-hmm. Does this let you do it as many times as you want?
Does it say you can't?
Yeah, I guess it doesn't. So this can throw itself too. So yeah, this by itself does 1400 damage. I mean, that's not that much, I guess, all told. I think that this a reliable combo piece that you can just, synchro summon and then just start chucking stuff at them. It feels to me like this would have gotten banned. So I guess I'll guess yes.
You are correct. Dark Strike Fighter is in fact banned, was in fact banned. They errated it and made it basically unplayable. So yeah, Dark Strike Fighter was notorious for several different OTK/FTK sort of strategies during this time. You pretty much pointed out every bad design problem with this card, where that it doesn't have a once per turn clause anywhere. It can launch itself. 2600, remember, we don't have summoning sickness, so there's a world where you could hit your opponent for 26, then tribute it off for another 14, right?
Yeah, that's half their life, right?
That would be half their life, yeah. And so typically this card was this really annoying card where if the game got to a point where they're under 1400 life or maybe more potentially, if there's other monsters on the field, they just sink into a Dark Strike Fighter, tribute everything off, and the game's just over. And aside from all the degenerate stuff you could also do with it, just wasn't a very fun card to play against. And so it was banned. They errated it. I think they made it so you can only do it during your first main phase to avoid that situation where you attack, then tribute it off. And I think you can only do it once per turn. If I'm
under Yu-Gi-Oh rules, can you, if they attack your monster, could you just then throw it at them?
What do you mean?
Like, can you tribute a monster that they're attacking with, like, they're trying to attack one of your guys? Could you then throw it, like, in combat?
Oh, like in response? No, you're not allowed to do that because it's not a quick effect, unfortunately. That would be crazy if you could do that. That would make this card even more
that's
busted.
just a classic Magic thing, is like you block their creature, then sacrifice for value. I was wondering if you could do that. I will say, though, if you had showed me this in like the first video we made, I would have gotten that wrong for sure. But it reminds me of taking one of those like long multiple choice question or tests about like a book, and you pick up plot of the book as you go on, and you can then answer questions even if you haven't read the book. I'm not going to say I took a lot of tests without studying, but you know. You
started off rocky, but you're getting back into it. You had to shake off the dust too.
Yeah,
it's been a while since we filmed together. All right, next one.
Brionac, Dragon of the Ice Barriers. This is 6 stars. It's a Sea Serpent Synchro effect. It's a 2300, 1400. These are all pretty big. It requires 1 tuner, 1 non-tuner. You can discard any number of cards to return the same number of cards from the field to the hand. So this includes their stuff and your stuff. I'm just going to guess this is banned. Like, this text box just looks unbelievably obnoxious. So I also...
Why do you say that? Why do you say that?
Well... Mass bounce is pretty annoying, especially when in Yu-Gi-Oh! You're gated by the number of cards you can play per turn.
Sure.
You know, and also, like, as I just learned in this video, if you bounce like a synchro or fusion monster, it goes back to whence it came, right? And that would include this, even though it says hand. In that case, it still would go back to those decks, right?
Correct. That's per the mechanics. That's how it works. Yeah.
Again, you can do this as many times as you want. You can bounce itself if you wanted to, for if you had a reason to do that. It just looks way too obnoxious. I could believe a world where this was like maybe not quite powerful enough. It does require you to discard a bunch of cards, but there's just I just feel like there's got to be a lot of ways to not only abuse this, but also just like no one wants to play a game where their stuff is continuously getting bounced back over and over again.
And you would be 100% correct. Brionac was one of the most powerful synchros. It was crazy strong for all the reasons you mentioned. You definitely picked up on what I said earlier. I was curious if you were going to remember. But for instance, a very easy way to out a Stardust Dragon, if you don't want to go into Goyo Guardian, is to make a Brionac, and you don't have to go to the battle phase in order to out it then, which made it more efficient to do. I imagine similarly to Magic, discarding cards to the graveyard is sometimes a good thing. So depending on the type of deck that you're playing, that could actually help extend your plays even further to do more plays, for instance. Something I also should mention is that you can use synchro monsters for synchro summons of other synchro monsters. So hypothetically, because they're considered non-tuners. So hypothetically, if you had, let's say, a 2-star tuner monster and your Brionac on the field, you could use the Brionac's effect, whatever, and then sync those two off into a Stardust Dragon. So something to keep in mind potentially for later. That's one of the cool things about Yu-Gi-Oh! You just keep going, and it's crazy. But yeah, Brionac, highly, highly abusable. There's a million different ways this card was just broken into the sun. It was banned. It's back because they errated it. It's awful. No one plays it, which is sad. I really hate that they errated these like classic cards because now they're only a shell of their former selves, and it's really unfortunate.
Yeah, as someone who has done some balancing, right? Like some of the games, digital games I've worked on, you could change cards. One of the things that you really strive not to do is change like the spirit of the card too much.
Yeah.
And when you do too many nerfs where it just doesn't play like it used to, it's at that point just leave it banned, make a new card. Like I don't really like that approach that much.
Yeah, I agree. Especially in a physical game, too. I feel like in a digital game, it's a lot easier because, then if you're playing a physical game, you go back to these older cards and they don't have the proper text. And I feel like it just causes a whole headache.
I think errating physical game cards is also just crazy. So I also wouldn't do that.
I agree. I've always been in the camp, if they're going to errata it, just make a new card that's inspired by the old one. I think it pays proper homage to, and it doesn't like desecrate the legacy of the old card. But we're getting too into the weeds on that. All right, you talked about how you mentioned all of these cards are fairly high level. Let's actually show you a low level synchro monster. I think you're going to think this card's pretty cool.
Formula Synchron. It's only 2 stars. It's a 200, 1500. Wow, way better on defense. Oh, it's like a transformer. That's why. See, it's a machine synchro tuner effect. Oh, so this counts as a tuner. So you could sack this. This has got to chain into other stuff.
It might be relevant for the effect.
When this card is synchro summoned, you can draw 1 card. Once per chain during your opponent's main phase, you can quick effect. Immediately after this effect resolves, synchro summon using this card you control. Oh, okay. Yes, so that is actually clearly the joke here, is that this when you synchro summon it, you draw a card and immediately replace it. So that's just making the card a little stronger. And then you can quick use this to synchro summon something during their turn. So once per chain during your opponent's main phase. So they have to do something to make it to let you do that, basically, right? Like,
correct.
They have to have basically something started, which is the same as Magic. You can't just do stuff during your opponent's turn. They naturally have priority. When it says after this effect resolves, it basically means when this the effect of Formula Synchron, when that happens.
Right. So as an example, let's say I use, because the stack works from my understanding differently than chains work in Yu-Gi-Oh! So I'll give you a bit of context on this. So let's say I activate some card. That card is now Chain Link 1, or, you know, in your case would go on the stack, right? In response to that, you can use Formula Synchron as Chain Link 2, and then everything resolves backwards. So Formula Synchron would resolve and would synchro summon with something else you have on the field. And then whatever the other effect was that was Chain Link 1 would also resolve. Oh,
that is actually exactly like Magic works.
Okay.
Last in, first out. I'm going to have to guess that this was banned because it just looks like a way to cheat out giant things fairly efficiently. Well, I mean, you do have to sync 2 cards into this, which is, I think, why they give you the card back. Because you're trying to make this not too much of a loss of value, but getting to quick summon or, you know, quick effect summon something on their turn, you need just this plus any non-tuner monster, and this is contributing 2 stars. Well, this is not. This is actually close. This kind of effect is the kind of effect that I think frequently does get banned, which is this is like a cheap enabler for other more powerful things. But I feel like I've got to be missing something as to how this got abused. You could have just summoned the other monster directly instead. If you had a non-tuner plus a tuner, you could have done that. Why would you get this one first? I guess it's because there's some really good cheap fodder. And then you have this as a 2-star that draws you a card and lets you summon on their turn. I'm going to have to guess this did get banned just because of how historically all of these kinds of effects work. But I wouldn't be surprised if this didn't. This like Brionac, it wasn't very close for me. This I think it's closer. So I'm gonna guess yes, it got banned, but I'm again ready to be wrong.
Okay, so Formula Synchron's interesting. You actually hit it right on the head when you said about taking lower level, you know, maybe cheap stuff you got for free and sort of just getting some free value out of it by drawing a card. So during this time in Yu-Gi-Oh's history, there was a lot of level 1 monsters that were both tuners and non-tuners, and there was also several level 1 tokens as well. And so it was very easy to get these cards for free. And so Formula Synchron, actually by synchro summoning it, it still gave you a tuner monster, but then you actually plussed because you got the card draw off of it before synchro summoning into the bigger thing. Also, you may have missed potentially that one of the things you could do, I actually showed you the card a little bit earlier, is being able to threaten that you can at any point Formula Synchron into Black Rose Dragon during your opponent's turn and destroy their entire board. So then you kind of put your opponent in this awkward position where it's like, oh, well, I need to find a way to bait this out so that way they can Black Rose preemptively so I can continue doing the rest of my play. And there's several other cards that you would want to use Formula Synchron for in that exact way, some of which we might still have yet to see. And so very powerful card, I think it's deceptively powerful, but like looking back, this card's crazy. Never banned though. It was limited to 1 just because there were some decks that were able to abuse this card, and but it was never banned. It was a card that people just like playing with because people like drawing cards at the end of the day.
Oh yeah,
so you're very close.
The best part of any game.
It was good enough to get limited, so you know you were
I consider if a card got limited instead of banned to be at least close to a draw there.
Yeah, you get your partial credit. You get your partial credit.
Exactly.
All right. Let's go ahead and show you another one of the Ice Barrier family members.
This is Trishula, Dragon of the Ice Barrier, and this is 9 stars. Yeah, 9 stars.
9. Yep.
Dragon Synchro effect, 1 tuner plus 2 or more non-tuner monsters. Okay, so this one's a little bit more high stakes.
Does require 3. It does require 3 monsters in total. This is the first one I've showed you. Yep.
I imagine that's actually not as big of a drawback as you might think, given to add up to 9, you would often need more than 2 anyway.
Sure.
When this card is synchro summoned, you can banish up to 1 card each from your opponent's hand, field, and graveyard, and the card in hand is chosen at random. Okay. Then it's a 2,700, 2,000. So it blows up the best thing in play. It banishes the best thing in play and their graveyard, and then a card at random from their hand. I mean, it is costly to get into play. It costs 3 cards, but you get at least 2 of those 3 right away. The graveyard card is not like a full card. Obviously, there's a lot of utility there because people use their graveyard a ton, I'm sure.
Sure.
But it's not like, when you're looking from a card advantage perspective, I typically would not count banishing a card in the graveyard as like getting a full card's worth of value. So you're not quite ahead because you traded 3 for basically 2 cards, plus this is definitely a hell of a card. It's a 2700, so that counts as like a card and a half almost. And then the graveyard card is like a little less than half a card. So you're still up like a solid card. And of course you get to do some targeting and whatnot there. This card seems strong. It does seem like the cost of sinking 3 cards into it is pretty big, but this is banishing. So this would not have been stopped by Stardust Dragon, right?
Correct. Because Stardust Dragon stops destruction effects, but not banish effects.
Yeah, that's an important distinction as well.
That is an important distinction. Yep.
I guess I would guess that this got banned as well.
Final answer?
Yeah, that's my final answer.
Well, you would be correct, because Trishula is the card that defined Yu-Gi-Oh! During this time. This has to be one of the craziest synchro monsters they've printed up until this point, for several reasons. First of all, you mentioned actually quickly about targeting. Trishula doesn't target, which makes this card even crazier. So how it would work is Trishula would activate its effect. So as the opponent, you would have to decide, okay, I can use things. I don't know what my opponent is going to banish until the card actually resolves. So you're put in this really awkward situation where you might have to preemptively activate cards to make sure you get some value out of them because you don't know if they're going to get banished by Trishula at the end of the day, unless there's only, 1 card on the field to get banished.
Well, the great part about that is then once you've used it, your opponent doesn't have to banish it. They just go get whatever your other thing is. So
right, exactly. So it's a very powerful effect, like you mentioned with Stardust Dragon specifically, but for a whole host of other cards. The fact that it doesn't target or destroy just makes it some of the most prime removal in the game. A lot of decks, I don't want to say a lot of decks, several decks during this era were able to summon multiple Trishula out it just keep summoning Trishula to even hand loop their opponent on the very first turn of the game because it doesn't have to banish from each of the zones. It can just banish from the hand, which is insane. And so there was plenty of decks that could do that. So it was banned very decisively, I will say, just because every deck was trying to find some way to summon Trishula, but also do what its deck did well. So it's no surprise to see that eventually got hit. I remember when this card got unhit, I believe they limited it back to 1, and everyone was losing their minds because they're like, oh my god, Trishula's back. Like, it's like, the boogeyman came back into the game. Didn't really do much, though. It was a bit power crept by that point. But by older Yu-Gi-Oh! Standards, Trishula, this is one of the most iconic cards from this era, and rightly so, because this card is insane. This card is absolutely nuts.
Yeah, there's a magic card called Council's Judgment that similarly lets you banish any card on the field, but you don't have to choose it until the spell resolves. It doesn't target.
Oh, okay.
And it has a lot of the same play patterns where it's like, oh, sure. Okay, I've got to... They could get anything, so I have to kind of use all my stuff, but that often puts you in a weaker position, and then they get, they just hit something else instead.
This is also another card that you could hypothetically use Formula Synchron on your opponent's turn to threaten if you have 7 other stars, because Formula Synchron's 2. As long as you have 2 other monsters, and that at any point your opponent's like, oh shit, well, if I can just get Trished, I'm just going to lose the game.
I will say in defense of this is at least a cool card. It's a repeated theme for me, but I feel like cards' coolness do justify a lot. Like I agree. At the end of the game, at the end of the day, you're trying to make a fun and interesting game. So at least make your cool cards the busted one. Having a card that's not cool and is complicated and is busted is like the worst of all worlds for me.
Speaking of which, let's see what you think about this card then.
All right, TG Hyper Librarian. So it's a 5-star spellcaster synchro effect. 1 tuner plus 1 or more non-tuners. It's a 2400, 1800. When a monster is synchro summoned, draw 1 card. This card must be face up on the field to activate and to resolve this effect. Does it count itself?
It does not count itself. It has to already be on the field. This
on its face doesn't look that crazy, just because you had to, you use up 2 cards to get, a 2400, 1800 is pretty big. And then whenever anyone else synchro summons a monster, you or your opponent, you draw a card. I mean, that is clearly what that does. What was the name of that banned card that was like whenever they play a creature, you draw a card?
Maxi.
Yeah. Maxi. Mm-hmm. It reminds me of that where like if you got to play this first and then maybe Synchro won something else and then on their turn they start by like, well, they've got a Synchro summon because that's a lot of what's going on. Maybe this draws you 2 or 3 cards and that's pretty obnoxious. I guess I'm going to lean towards this didn't get banned, but I bet it was pretty good.
Okay. All right, final answer.
Yeah.
So Hyper Librarian's crazy. So there's a lot of decks around this era as well. I said there were the decks that would try to spam Trishula and like hand loop the opponent. There was other Synchro decks that were doing other things as well. TG Hyper Librarian was a great way because with Synchro Summoning, right, we're taking 2 of our cards to make 1. So we're always losing card advantage there. Hyper Librarian, if you have a deck that was constructed in such a way where let's say you're not playing the best cards or the best decks in any given moment, but you're playing like maybe a deck that is like tier 2-ish that's going to play a bunch of cards that can like on their own are really bad, but they're all fodder to synchro summon. So they might be a bit more lenient in how easily you're able to special summon everything. You could reasonably summon not even just 1, but multiple copies of Hyper Librarian. And now all of a sudden you're getting all of these synchro monsters for free while
Once
also drawing cards.
You could probably draw like your whole deck, right?
Basically. And that is what some of these decks during this time were designed to do. I'm talking specifically for people watching about like the Quasar decks and such. Even in regular decks, people would still play Hyper Librarian. Don't get me wrong, it was still a good card, but it definitely was abused in the big synchro spam decks that would just try to put their whole extra deck onto the field and draw their whole deck, like you said, to kind of go into and funnel into this one big synchro monster that has this huge payoff, right? That was the dream. But it was never banned. It was only, like you pointed out, having 2 of this card get really obnoxious. Also, this card in tandem with Formula Synchron is even more gross because Formula Synchron already draws you a card, and then Hyper Librarian draws you another card too. So it just kept going, basically. It was all the card draw.
But it sounds like it was like a tier 1.5 to 2 combo more than like this is oppressive.
Yeah, it was more so like you're going to play this deck that goes all in on doing this one thing, and if you can't do that, you're probably going to lose the game. Right. But I would say, like I said, there were the tier 1 decks would still play Hyper Librarian if the opportunity presented itself for them to just get some extra card draw off of doing a big synchro play. That wasn't uncommon by any means. But yeah, the biggest abusers were the decks that were sort of all-in combo decks, and limiting the card to 1 was enough that people were pretty content with that. And just, you know, getting 1 or 2 draws was fine. It was something that people were totally
How big
okay with.
Can your synchro deck be?
15 cards is the limit.
Yeah, I mean, 15 is a kind of a lot, especially if you're probably summoning the like best 2 or 3 80% of the time or whatever. You have a lot of room in there. So having a copy of this when you know on a turn that you know you're going to go like play a Formula Synchron, then Synchron into something else seems pretty nice. Right.
And I haven't shown you like some of the ridiculous, crazy, like Timmy combo boss monsters, maybe yet anyway. But that when you see some of those, you might be like, okay, I could see I want to funnel through Hyper Librarian to like keep some card economy while I can get to this larger guy. That was kind of the objective of this card. But cool card. Cool card. Let us see what you think about this card.
Coral Dragon. So it's 6 stars, Dragon Synchro Tuner effect. So this counts as a tuner. It requires a tuner plus a non-tuner monster, and it's a 2400. Oh, 500. So it's not very good on defense. Once per turn, you can discard a card, then target 1 card your opponent controls. Destroy it. Okay. If this Synchro Summon card is sent from the field to the graveyard, you can draw 1 card. You can only use this effect of Coral Dragon once per turn. So that's 2 different abilities?
Correct.
Okay,
yes.
so
those are both independent of one another.
Once per turn, you can discard a card to destroy one of their cards. Great ability. And when this dies, you can draw a card.
If it's Synchro Summoned. So that means that if you were to resurrect this card after it already went to the graveyard.
Card. Okay, I didn't realize that actually had like relevance to
it does. Text. Yes.
You can only use this effect of Coral Dragon once per turn. Oh, I see. That's not really saying anything. It's basically because that's how the rules work. You could technically just activate this a bunch, but it's just basically saying when this dies, you draw a card.
So I will clarify, this is actually a very good card to talk about this because, so we have in Yu-Gi-Oh!, this is getting into the weeds of it, but we have what are called soft once per turns and hard once per turns. A soft once per turn means that once the card has used its effect, and the example of this is the first effect here, where it says once per turn, discard a card, target a card your opponent controls, destroy it. A soft once per turn, let's say the Coral Dragon dies somehow and you resurrect it, you're allowed to use that first effect again. Or if you synchro summoned a second Coral Dragon, you're allowed to use that first effect.
But if they say the name,
again.
It's like when your parents call you by your full name. It's more authority. You can only use Coral Dragon once per turn.
It is exactly that. So we call that a hard once per turn.
Right,
you would not be able to get the value off of the sending it to the graveyard multiple times in the same turn.
And it doesn't matter if it was this one or another one.
Correct.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. Okay, so this is not the hardest to summon, and it lets you kill anything they have, though you do have to discard a card, so that's at least even. But then when this dies, you draw a card. Right? Discard a card to kill a card. It might be a 1-for-1, but you get to discard your worst card to kill their best card on the field, and you didn't have to spend any resources to play that card, whereas they presumably did. And then, of course, this always replaces itself. Well, not always, because again, the once per turn thing, but pretty reliably replaces itself.
Yeah.
I think that this probably got banned, and the reason I say that is this is kind of just a value card that's really efficient and really powerful, and I feel like you would just want to play a ton of these because they just kind of they just kill. You're going to end up being up ahead every time this card hits the field, one way or another, and that just feels like a kind of obnoxious attrition game to just play over and over again.
So one thing you also may not have picked up on, which is fine because you're still new to the mechanic, is that it says if this synchro summon card is sent from the field to the graveyard. That also counts if you use it as a synchro material for another synchro summon.
I did notice it was a tuner monster, so I guess it makes sense. Yes, this was also part of. Oh yeah, this card actually seems way too good then.
Yeah, so it's cool because, like you said, you could summon Coral Dragon, you could pop one of your opponent's monster, or one card your opponent controls, excuse me, not even monster. Pop one of your opponent's things. We've talked about how Graveyard in Yu-Gi-Oh! Similar to Magic's like a second hand, so that could honestly be a benefit to you most of the time. And then if you were to have another non-tuner monster, you could then sync the Coral Dragon and another thing off to summon a bigger thing, and you get to draw a card to replace the Coral Dragon there. Phenomenal card. I think this is actually just a very well-designed card. Might come as a shock to you. Not banned, never been limited. This is actually just like a very well-designed Yu-Gi-Oh! Card by our standards.
That's cool. It's nice when a card, like, kind of the dream is to make a card that like reads incredible, plays well, is very good, but isn't quite too good. It doesn't ruin things. So I guess this hit that mark.
It did. I will say this is a newer card, and so I think had this been printed when, you know, cards like Brionac and some of the older cards were printed, it would definitely have maybe gotten hit in some capacity. But with where Yu-Gi-Oh! Was at around the time Coral Dragon was printed, it was at the highest rarity in the booster set that it was initially printed in. So there was a lot of like hype and like excitement surrounding this card because on the surface it just reads like a really strong, efficient card, like you said. But the decks that could play it, played it. Some decks even nowadays will take advantage of it if the opportunity presents itself. But yeah, there's nothing really like egregious going on here. It's honestly, a lot of people would think this is a really well-designed card.
I gotta say, this has like some of the best art I've seen on a Yu-Gi-Oh! Card.
It's really cool. Yeah.
And comparing it, I'm sure it's similar in Yu-Gi-Oh! Where like a lot of people love the like art from the first couple sets because it's like so iconic and
sure.
You know, Magic's like that too. I have like pieces on my wall, like right there, you know, Sheevan Dragon and Mox Sapphire and stuff. That being said, I think the art from the newer sets is like objectively a little higher quality, and this this certainly looks very good.
Well, it was very much low polygon, like almost AI looking art for the first few sets of Yu-Gi-Oh!
Yeah, I've noticed that.
wasn't the highest fidelity, that's for sure. All right, only a few left, and boy, are we saving some of the best for last. Let's see what you think about this guy.
Chaos Ruler, the Chaotic Magical Dragon. I hope it's good. 8 stars, Dragon Synchro Effect. Requires one of each type of monster. If this card is Synchro Summoned, you can excavate the top 5 cards of your deck. What does excavate mean? Does that mean mill?
Not mill. It means to look. You essentially reveal the top 5 of your deck. Yeah.
You can excavate the top 5 cards of your deck, and if you do, you can add 1 excavated light or dark monster to your hand. Also send the remaining cards to the graveyard. Okay, so yeah, that's straight up like in Magic. You look at your top 5 or reveal your top 5, and then put 1 in the hand, the rest on the bottom. 1 light or dark monster, so 1 total. And you can banish 1 light and 1 dark monster from your hand and or graveyard, except this card. Special summon this card from your graveyard, then banish it when it leaves the field. You can only use each effect once per turn, and it's at 3,200. So you summon this, you immediately get to look at the top 5 cards of your deck, and get a light or dark monster to your hand, which I imagine if you build your deck with this in mind, you'll hit most of the time. And then the first time this dies, you then get to banish a light and a dark monster, hopefully from your graveyard, not your hand, because you want to have gotten the use out of them. And then you just get to special summon this and then immediately draw again. This card looks completely out of control. Am I missing something? Like I do think this got banned. This looks crazy. Like you play this, it immediately gives you a card back most of the time. Obviously you can miss while stalking your graveyard. And then when it comes back a second time, it does the same thing again, though it just doesn't come back a third time. You could just get other Chaos Rulers. They really stack well.
And you would be correct. Chaos Ruler is absolutely fucking crazy. For all the reasons you said, I don't really think I have much to add. I think a couple things. So it's interesting because, like you say in Magic, how there's a lot of effects. You look at the top whatever and then add one of those cards. Yu-Gi-Oh! This may surprise you. Yu-Gi-Oh! Doesn't have a lot of those types of effects. I think it's because those effects are almost just really too powerful for our game, so they're not as common as they might be in Magic. And so when people read this card, this is actually a relatively new card. This card came out within the past, I want to say 5 years. People read this card and they were just losing their mind because it's almost like exactly how you were like just digesting it. You're just like, am I missing something? Like, where's the downside? There is like no downside to this card. It's all gas. It's crazy. There are some other things too where you can resurrect itself, but then it banishes when it leaves the field. We haven't gotten to it yet, but there are ways to circumvent that. So you could potentially bring it back a third time. So, you know, we'll get to those mechanics later on. I don't want to throw too much at you. And light and dark synergy, we call this chaos, harkening back to some of the first, if you remember Chaos Emperor Dragon, speaking of broken cards, we call these types of cards chaos cards, hence why it's Chaos Ruler. It's light and dark are probably the two best supported attributes in the entire game throughout the game's history. So just to not only get the best card from the top 5 when it's summoned, but then you're probably sending the best 4, like you're sending 4 cards to the graveyard on top of it, which is also just a plus because again, graveyard second hand, all that. It can resurrect itself. It's 3,000. There's just so much upside to this card that it's absurd. And yeah, it did get banned. It was just, it was really, really good.
Well, I mean, the reason you don't see those effects much in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is because of the mana system or I guess lack thereof. Like,
right.
In Magic, you pay mana, you pay resources to get more card selection. That's a common thing you do, but you have to balance. If you spend too many resources on that, you're not using them on like advancing your board. Yu-Gi-Oh! You don't have to pay that. So any card, like a Yu-Gi-Oh! Card that just said, look at your top 2 cards, put one in your hand, the other in the graveyard, a spell, that would be unbelievably broken. Yeah. So that's why
Yu-Gi-Oh!'s the game you get to do that. That's the best part. All right, only a few left. Let's keep on with the crazy payoff synchros here. Tell me what you think about this one.
Ruddy Rose Dragon is 9 stars, or is that 10? That's 10 stars.
10 stars.
That's all. It's a lot of stars to count. It's a dragon synchro effect. It requires a tuner and a non-tuner. It's a 3,200, 2,400. And if this card is synchro summoned, you can banish all cards from the graveyards. Then, if this card was synchro summoned using Black Rose Dragon or a plant synchro monster as material, you can destroy all other cards in the field. So this one actually blows up everything else.
Correct.
When your opponent activates a card or effect that would destroy a card, you can quick effect, you contribute this card, negate the activation, then you can special summon a Black Rose Dragon from your extra deck or graveyard, which...
Welcome to Yu-Gi-Oh!
Which could also blow up the field if it wanted to, right?
No, so Black Rose Dragon, to refresh your memory, does have to be synchro summoned. And yes, so you are, this is again getting into the weeds of it, but you are allowed in certain cases, like with Ruddy Rose Dragon, you are allowed to special summon monsters from your extra deck. Granted, the conditions are there, but there's some stipulations. So they're not considered as a synchro summon, so any sort of on synchro summon effects won't trigger, like with the original Black Rose Dragon. Also, if that summoned Black Rose Dragon were to die or leave the field in any way and go to the graveyard, you're not allowed to resurrect it because it wasn't properly synchro summoned in the first place. So it's almost like this like temporary, you get the body, but then if the body leaves the field, there's really no way to get it back. And that's just like a mechanics thing.
Yeah, but looking at Black Rose Dragon, you could still use the banish a plant monster from your graveyard sort of deal. You
could still use that effect, yes.
And it's a lot more likely at the point where you're using this that you've got plant monsters in your deck, I would imagine, because
yes, yeah. Even though Ruddy Rose Right. Even though Ruddy Rose is a dragon, this whole archetype that Black Rose and Ruddy Rose are from is predominantly a plant-based archetype, and this is sort of like the boss monster they all funnel into, just for some context there.
So 10 stars is a lot. That's not trivial at all. All graveyards and destroying all other cards on the field. And then when your opponent activates a card or effect that would destroy one of your cards, you can then stop it. Though you do turn this into a Black Rose, which is like a slight downgrade. I mean, how big is Black Rose again? It's
2,400.
2,400? Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's slight.
Still respectable for context. Yeah. 2,400 is still a pretty decently sized.
I'm actually going to go out on a limb. I'm going to say this did not get banned. This looks like the kind of big game-ending effect that you kind of want to have access to if this is the kind of mechanics you're using. It looks expensive enough that maybe this could actually fly. So I'm going to guess it didn't get banned.
Correct. Ruddy Rose Dragon has never been anywhere on the ban list. It's just sort of a niche card. I wouldn't say this card's bad by any means. I would say people were playing this mainly just for the banish all cards from the graveyard effect. I would say very rarely were people actually using this for the other effect, part of the effect, where if you synchro summoned it using Black Rose Dragon to nuke the field. It was just a level 10 synchro that, during the time where this card was around, there was a lot of decks that did play from the graveyard. And so having a way in your extra deck to essentially just banish the entire graveyard meant that you were probably going to be in a very commanding position. And so this was an option that some people just chose to incorporate in their extra deck. Just a solid card. I wouldn't say this card's like broken by any means. I wanted to see just throwing you big flashy card if you would think that, oh, this is crazy, but you did not take the bait. You did not take the bait. Not this time. But we still have a few left, and we're going to keep throwing the big heavy hitters at you. So let's see what you think about this card.
Psychic End Punishers. This is 4/8. Is that 11 stars now? All right.
That is 11. That is
11 stars. It's a Psychic Synchro effect. I can't even tell what's going on in the art anyway. It's a 3,500, 3,500. Massive. While your life points are less than equal to your opponent's, this Synchro Summon card is unaffected by your opponent's activated effects. Once per turn, you can pay 1,000 life points, then target one monster you control and one card your opponent controls, banish them. At the start of the battle phase, you can make this card gain attack equal to the difference between your life points and your opponent's. Wow, okay. So this has a protection mode, and it's not a quick effect though, right? The once per turn paying 1,000 life.
Correct. So, that is an ignition effect, a sorcery speed effect.
Right. So yes. you can't like use this to make this untargetable like in response to your stuff, but your opponent's things. But you can just get this out, immediately pay 1,000 life, and trade your worst monster for whatever their best card is and banish them both. If you target your monster and their card and then something happens to your monster, their card still just gets banished, right?
Correct, unless that card would be negating this effect. Yeah, for the most part, it would still banish on resolution. Yes.
I can't imagine that happens like a ton, but maybe if there's like a quick effect that let you sacrifice tribute one of your own monsters for an effect, you could like target both, then sack your own thing. But and then also when they have more life, this also hits for more. So this could, if you're at low life, this could hit for like 5,000 or something.
Potentially.
Yeah, I once again think this is just huge and flashy, but not too good, though it does seem strong once you get it into play. 11 is just a lot. So I'm going to guess this didn't get banned.
Well, I did mention that every card I'm showing you that play under the assumption that it is not difficult to get into these cards. So I'm not sure if that sways your answer at all. So I just want to remind you.
Yeah, I mean, even if, I guess a 3,500 that can attack is like much bigger is pretty big, and then lets you sack your own things to kill their stuff. I don't know. I guess I'm still going to guess it didn't get banned, but obviously there's some powerful stuff going on there.
Yeah, sure. Final answer.
Yeah.
And you are correct. You did not take the bait once again. So Psychic End Punisher, incredible card in the decks that can play it. One of the main decks that could actually play this card, the main gimmick of that archetype is a lot of their effects require you to pay life points. So your life points are almost always going to be lower than your opponent's for the most part. And this was sort of their big payoff because they could summon Psychic End Punisher on like the very first turn. It would have 8,000 attack because they could pay their life points all the way down to such a point where the discrepancy is going to be so big that this guy is massive. It's unaffected by your opponent's card effects, which is not just like targeting. That means it can't be destroyed. That means it can't be banished. Just anything that is an activated effect does not affect Psychic End Punisher, which is a wide spectrum of different abilities. Right. And so it has a lot of built-in protection. It has presumably large attack stat, even though 3,500 by itself is already really big, and it's able to just take out your opponent's stuff every turn by paying 1,000 if you so wish. Really insane card, but it might come as a surprise to you that there are just enough cards in the game that can take this card out, that it's not really too problematic. I would say that there's only a handful of decks that can really take full advantage of a card like this. Don't get me wrong, it's insanely powerful for the decks that can play it, but in terms of, like, is it the best thing that you could be doing? Maybe. It is really just kind of contextual to the format, but there are plenty of checks in the game that can really check Psychic and Punisher, so it's not as bad as it may seem on paper. And last but not least, I think we may have saved the best for last. This one should be fun. Let's see what you think about this one.
Baron de Fleur. This is 4, 7, 10 stars. It's a warrior synchro effect. It's 3,000, 2,400. It requires a tuner and a non-tuner. Once per turn, you can target one card on the field. Destroy it. Fair enough. Once while face up on the field, when a card or effect is activated, quick effect, you can negate the activation, and if you do destroy that card, you can only use the previous effect of Baron de Fleur once per turn. I see they named it. So basically, once per turn, you can use this to just negate any card or effect. Okay. And once per turn during the standby phase, you can target one level 9 or lower monster in your graveyard, return this card to the extra deck, and then special summon it, but not synchro summon it. So,
well, it's from your graveyard anyway. So yeah, It doesn't have to be a synchro monster; it could be any monster. But yes, if you pick a synchro monster, hypothetically, it would not be considered synchro summon. Correct.
That's funny that it doesn't just summon right from your graveyard. It returns this card to the extra deck and then special summons it.
You have to give it some downside, LSV.
Yeah, I guess so. Because that's like the weird summoning. So it's a 3,000 that once per turn destroys a card, and it can also just negate any card or effect. And that's once per turn or just once overall?
So the second effect is once while face up on the field. You're only allowed to do that while Baron, like if you summon Baron de Fleur, you can only use that effect once. It has the, you can only use that effect once per turn. In the hypothetical case where, let's say, you summon multiple copies of Baron, or you summon a Baron, negate something, and maybe there's a way to, like, resurrect that Baron, and then, so you can't use that negation effect twice. So even though it says once while face up on the field, I think they were trying to check multiple of these being in play potentially, or like a repeatability element.
Ridiculously confusing way to write that. But
welcome to Yu-Gi-Oh, my friend.
Well, I understand you only want to use the card once ever, but then when you say it can only be once per turn, that really heavily implies you can use it every turn. But I do understand that you could only use that once.
You've also seen older Yu-Gi-Oh cards where they didn't use that clause at all. So they might be, sort of, dotting their I's and crossing their T's there.
No, totally. That's one of the things you do have to do. It is tough to write that. That line of text is a tough one.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, this card does seem very good. So I'm leaning towards it being banned, and the reason is it just straight up unconditionally just destroys something, and then just unconditionally just counters something and destroys that effect if it came off a card, or just stops a card and whatever, or effect, and whatever that effect came from destroys it. And then it also just once per turn immediately gets a level 9 or lower monster onto the field. It just feels like this does everything too well. Like, it kills anything, it brings something back, and it counters something. And like all those combined is just like, when they play a Baron, like, what are you going to do? You're going to lose your best thing. They're going to get their best thing that they can out of the graveyard. And then the first thing you do that's good, they just counter. So this seems like when I look at some of the other cards that are powerful, like Psychic and Punisher, or like Ruddy Rose Dragon, but like this kind of does all the things and there's no real drawback. So I would have to guess this got banned.
Final answer for the final synchro.
That'll be my final answer.
You're correct. I'm not even going to beat around the bush. So Baron de Fleur actually recently just got hit on our ban list, and rightfully so. One thing that's interesting, and this is not necessarily for you, but something that you might find interesting, is that level 10 synchros that didn't just require at minimum 2 monsters were actually quite rare, if almost non-existent in Yu-Gi-Oh! For the longest time. Going into like a level 8 monster, for instance, like Stardust Dragon, was quite common. That was like sort of the top end. When you start getting to level 9, like Trishula, it usually required 3 monsters in total in order for you to commit to that. And if there was something that was a level 10 synchro, it usually required 3 materials, or it required you to jump through all these different hoops in order for you to summon it. And there were so many times where people look and they're just like, damn, I really wish I had a good level 10 synchro I could play. And Baron de Fleur was the answer to everyone's prayers, because this is arguably one of the most broken synchro monsters they've ever printed, for all the reasons that you aforementioned, right? I mean, the fact that immediately it can just destroy something when it hits the field, the fact that it protects itself by not only being able to negate anything that would threaten it, but anything else on the rest of your board. Going turn 1 Baron de Fleur in a myriad of different decks, this was like the thing to be doing, because this paired with other cards that had similar effects would make it really difficult for your opponent to play the game, because now all of a sudden you have 2 or 3 of these types of cards that are going to blank 2 or 3 of your opponent's cards when they start their turn. And so it was incredibly oppressive. And I think what really hurt Baron is the fact that it was so generic, because every deck that had the ability to synchro summon into a high-level synchro monster was able to abuse this card. And so every deck sort of just became, let's funnel into Baron de Fleur and whatever else our deck does, right? And so it sort of homogenized a lot of these like combo deck end boards and just made it not really fun or interesting to play against. And so as a result, they finally banned Baron de Fleur. And I think a lot of people are happy about that, because this card can be incredibly frustrating to play against. It is just, it's really good, and people really love playing with it, but you love playing with it when it's on your side of the field, and you hate it when you're playing against it, like any good card game player, right?
There's a difference between people love this card and people love winning, and it seems like this card is more on the people love winning side. It's even a lie. It doesn't require 2 monsters because you get 1 back immediately. Like you're not really giving that up that much.
Well, that's during the next standby phase, so you'd have to wait an entire turn for you to actually get a monster
so
back.
You can't do that immediately. So I didn't know when the standby phase occurred. So
Sure. So the standby phase is right after the draw phase. So you'd presumably be summoning Baron de Fleur
I see. So
in
this
phase 1 or 2.
But this will survive because you can counter anything that would kill it. So most of the time you're going to get a pretty good shot at getting that value.
Right. For the most part, I would say that's the case. And honestly, the third effect of Baron is probably the least used. It's not like it was not good, don't get me wrong, but I think for the most part...
The 1 turn delay on it has to make it the weakest of the abilities.
Precisely.
The other 2 just always work, basically.
Yeah, and there's plenty of cards that this card synergizes with where they say, you know, instead of saying when this card is synchro summoned, they might say when this card is special summoned, right? So that means it would trigger the effect after getting summoned off of Baron, for instance. So there was plenty of just good things you could do with it, and especially after you already used the negation, maybe you don't want to keep Baron around anymore, right? So you want to tag it out for something better in your graveyard to maybe even re-synchro summon out Baron de Fleur so that you could use that negation effect once again. It's just, it's an incredible card. It's something that people, like I said, they love it and they hate it at the same time, but that's card games at the end of the day. Yeah, I think it did pretty well.
The thing you said about homogenizing the end game of all the decks, that's something you do want to look out for, and that I can certainly see why this would do that.
I would say that there are other synchros that I didn't show you. I wanted to keep it simple, and I showed you, for the most part, fairly generic synchros. Some of the ones that might require specific attributes, like, you know, wind or dark, or some that require specific types, like warrior, dragon, whatever. Some of those may have these more powerful effects, but they have much higher stipulations because not every deck can run them, right? So that helped increase diversity of what these decks can do. But Baron being generic was just... every deck was trying to play this if they could. It was insane how powerful this card was.
Yeah, totally.
And still is. This was basically in like every deck for the past couple of years while it was legal. It was just that good. So what do you think about synchro summoning, LSV? What do you think?
Oh, it's cool. I really like effects where you're like trying to find a way to like cheaply sacrifice fodder to get a more powerful effect. I've played a lot of Magic decks that do that kind of thing, and I find that kind of a resource utilization really and optimization really fun. And I don't know, I like really big monsters, and I think that can be pretty fun. There's a cycle of Magic cards called Wishes, where I think I might have mentioned it in a previous video, that basically let you pull a card out of your extra deck, and those are also a lot of fun too, because they let you get access to all these cards that you wouldn't normally get access to, and like have a toolbox effect. And synchro summoning definitely has aspects of that. So yeah, these have been very cool. I do, like you said, tend to like the ones that require specific types more, because I think those are just tell a better story and are more fun. So
sure,
those do seem like a cool way to go down. But looking at a lot of these cards, like Formula Synchron, I bet I would have really enjoyed playing with that. And Coral Dragon looks like a fun one too, for sure.
Yeah, no, it's like you said with like trying to get as much value out of all your cards as possible, right? Token cards in our game have levels as well. So like if you have any token producing cards, you can sync off those to actually get like a real threat out of the token, because maybe the token is just a 0/0, but it's a level 3. So maybe you could do that and, you know, a tuner and make something bigger out of it, right? Or you just have cards that get, you know, cheap monsters out onto the field, and you're able to convert them into something like this. And people really love this mechanic. This is, you know, in a lot of ways better fusion summoning, because it doesn't require you to have this specific card to summon the big payoff out of your extra deck. It's like, okay, I have the tuners and the non-tuners, and there's plenty of good, powerful tuner monsters in the game that over time were just good cards in general that also just happen to be tuners, and people would just play those, and it's like, oh, cool, if I need to have this utility of this card being a tuner, I don't have to play, you know, a Dark Resonator type card, because that's not very good, in order to access this entire mechanic out of the extra deck. And so there's still a few other mechanics in the extra deck that we've yet to show you, and I actually think they get even more generic as the mechanics evolve. So I'll be curious to see what you think about those.
Oh, I just realized the extra deck for Fusion and Synchron is just the same one. They're not. You don't. It's have all multiple.
Shared. It's all shared.
So that does eat at the space pretty dramatically then. So that
absolutely. So you have 15 cards for all of the mechanics, where when there's only one, it was just the Fusion deck, right?
Right.
But yeah, this is one of the most contentious parts about Yu-Gi-Oh! Because fighting for slots in the extra deck is really tough sometimes. And so you'll see people saying, oh, I wish the extra deck's 20 cards or 25 cards. But I think it's good that it's 15. It forces people to make concessions.
I like that. Magic sideboards are 15. I think that's a great number.
So guys, that's going to wrap it up for another video. I really hope you all enjoyed. Let's go ahead and shout the patrons for all of their continued support. So shoutouts to Shadow1317, Tim00x3, MBT Play Medolce, Moto, Cameron L. Smith, The Synchro Guy, Pony Stark, Dan the Man Hoban, Little Fade Leaf, Draconic, Dylan Rare Hunter, JW11860, Brian Dancer of Class 7, Flannel Daddy, Twinkle Muncher, literally all of the guinea pigs, Cheeks McLapperty, Stolfin Amethyst, MBT Cancel Bio Community soon, Cancel Bio Committee soon, Cancel Bio Player soon, Wonder Waffle, Main Phase 2 Synchro on that thing, Daniel Howell, Life Keeps Using Solemn Judgment on My Hopes and Dreams, and Naveed Mandavi. Thank you so much again for watching, and we will see you next time.